Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. It's Emma. I'm finally here to film a video that a lot of people have been asking for a very long time. If you are new here, I think this is great because this is going to be my favorite books of all time. This is going to be a really hard video to film. I did not narrow it down. We have a ton of books to talk about. But yeah, I just think this will give you a good idea of, I guess, my reading taste, my favorite books, what I like, and as well some stellar recommendations. I believe all of these are like 5-star, love of my life, the best books I've ever found on the planet, and a lot of the times the best things you found on the planet are the ones that are the hardest to talk about, but I'm going to try my best. These are arranged in a chronological order from when I met them, encountered them in my life. My first favorite book I found when I was 8 years old, and the last one all the way up until this year. So that's kind of how I've arranged it. I could never put these in like a favorite order, if that makes sense. So that's where they're arranged. So I'm just going to go through them, tell you about them, and not tell you a little bit about the plot and stuff, but maybe about like how they affected me, where I found them, what my experience with them was too, because I think that's sometimes a bit more interesting. So let's just get into it. We have tons to talk about, and I'm pretty sure the first book, everyone, you all know what it is. So there's no surprises. No Surprises by Radiohead. Okay, so these first two books go absolutely hand in hand. They are my first two favorite books that I ever found in my life. The first one is The Phantom of the Opera. It is The Phantom of the Opera by Stanislaw Lem. No one is surprised. Oh my god, this book is part of like my very soul and essence. I just think it's fantastic. I just absolutely love this book so much. I'm gonna try not to say that for all of these books. We all know I love them. This book has just like stalked me throughout my entire life in various odd, strange, and wonderful ways. I first found it in my elementary school library in the 3rd grade. I checked it out, I read it. Did I understand everything that happened? No, I was freaking 8 years old, but it just followed me around relentlessly. It seemed to pop up wherever I went. My 8th grade elementary school class put on the Phantom of the Opera play for the whole school, and it just became something that I just embraced so much, loved so much, read relentlessly. I adored this book. This book is about a man who is scarred, he is disfigured, he is an outcast, an exile, but he is also a genius and is so good in a variety of different things, from architecture to music to magic, being a magician, being a ventriloquist, like you name it. This guy can probably do it. He essentially haunts the underbelly of the Paris Opera House. I just think there's so many things going on in this book to talk about. I was actually given the just dream opportunity of my life last summer, to write a foreword and introduction for a new printing of Phantom of the Opera that came out with Augmented Classics. So if you want to check them out, I wrote the foreword. That was just like an out-of-body experience. And this book just means the world to me. I think it's hilarious. To me, this is just like one of the funniest books I've ever read. It's a really cool detective novel, but it does so much more than that. There's a variety of things to explore. There's the gothic, music, love, ugliness, death, being an exile, being an outcast. What does that mean? Society's expectations, the love of opera, the love of music, just wanting to exist in the world. Oh God, I just think it's perfect. It breaks my heart. I cry. I laugh every single time. I don't need to talk too much more about this. This next book, I think I talk about, I don't even know when I've ever talked about this on my channel. I think maybe when I first started my booktube channel, but that book is Phantom by Susan Kay. I found this book when I was in the 6th grade, so when I was 11, and it was at this like outdoor garage sale. And it was just like at the bottom of a cardboard box full of books, and I just like saw it, like this face just like stared at me, this mask, and I was like, what is this? Like, I've never heard of this. And I picked it up and I read it, and I just fell head over heels with it as well. And it's also been something that I've just held on to for so long. Nothing has eclipsed this. This is like the best reworking, reimagining of someone's life I think I've maybe ever read. So Susan Kay takes Eric, who is the opera ghost in Phantom of the Opera, and she imagines his whole entire life pieced together from details that are either explicitly stated in Phantom of the Opera, or of course there's a lot of work of imagination going on in here. So you follow him from his birth all the way until his death. I think this is so good. It's so haunting. It just, these two books together, like when you put them together, you read them side by side. Oh, as you can see, this copy is absolutely in need of some love. An ex-boyfriend left my favorite book out in a rainstorm when I lent it to him to read, so obviously there's a reason he's an ex-boyfriend. I'm kidding, I actually kind of like it. It adds some nice character to it. It is so brutal, and I just love this book so much. So those are my first two favorite books of all time. Obviously, highly recommend. I think they're wonderful. This next one is also an author you're gonna see pop up on this list more than once, but it is Rilke, and this one is his Book of Hours. I think Rilke is, I feel like these are all staples of my channel. Rilke is my favorite poet, one of my favorite thinkers, writers. When did I meet him? I met him in high school through a young adult book about werewolves because he was mentioned in the book, and then I just went out and gobbled up his work. I think Rilke has been the biggest philosophical foundation of my life. Not perfectly, obviously, not wholly encapsulating, but so many of his ideas, and especially at such an early age. Like, I read his first work when I was 15. I just like went out of my way to try and base so many of my life principles on his work, which I know a lot of people do when they're enamored with someone and they fall in love so much and see themselves so much in someone's work. So now when I read his work and I look at it, I just see myself kind of reflected back at me, and it's this kind of weird mirroring that's always going on. So much of his work I have just in my head memorized. I can tell you 100% this is the author that is the most personal to me, the poet who is the most influential to me growing up and still is. I mean, we're all still growing up, and his works just affect me like nothing else has. I've very rarely come across in my reading, since reading him at 15, someone who just strikes me down and like rips open like the material of the world to let you see into other things like he does for me. To me, Rilke is just like this unearthly, completely like immaterial, ethereal thinker who is so full of love and so full of kindness and gentleness, but also sees the like brutality of the world and also knows the shame, the fear, the anxiety, and so much of his work centers around death and attitudes towards death. The Book of Hours, which is the whole point of this spiel, is on here as one of my favorite pieces. This was one of the, I think this might have been the second piece of Rilke work that I read, but essentially this is also called Love Poems to God. Rilke's relationship with God as well is is just wholly unique. Not really tied down too much to any tradition that you might be thinking of. It's like holy and worshiping. It's a deep-seated appreciation of just life and living and being and creating and the human as implicated in the creation, and it's just so gorgeous. I'll just read you. Maybe I'll just read you some of these because I just cry. I cry every time I read this. I remember reading this for the first time, and you know when you read someone, you know that feeling when you read their words, it comes off the page and you're like, how are you in my head? Why are you in my head knowing the things that I'm thinking? And suddenly you've said this thing that is like a salvation to a thought that I had. It's like a salve to a wound that I kept on picking for so many years, and you've suddenly come up with this configuration of words that so immediately either presses deeper into that wound, but also at the same time works to heal it from within because it has such a deep understanding of that wound. I said I wasn't going to talk this much. Okay. When I lean over the chasm of myself, it seems my God is dark and like a web, 100 roots silently drinking. This is the ferment I grow out of. Then suddenly you're left all alone, with your body that can't love you, and your will that can't save you. But now, like a whispering in dark streets, rumors of God run through your dark blood. Anyway, that is that. I freaking love this. I could go on and on about this forever. I think I have. So that is The Book of Hours. Phenomenal. Okay, moving on. Finally, a book I've not talked about in a while on my channel, and I think people, hopefully you guys, maybe this will come as a surprise because I haven't read this book for many, many years. It's high time to do a reread, and that is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Oh, I have so much ringing in my ear right now. Oh, the tinnitus is really going. Yeah, okay, we're just gonna talk through it. So, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. I want to say David Mitchell is one of my favorite authors. I have a lot of his books. I've only read 2 of them, which is Cloud Atlas and Ghost Written. but I just know. I just know. You know when you know? You know. You know, when you know, you know. Cloud Atlas. I first read this in high school as well. I first actually saw the movie. So the book is undoubtedly far better than the movie. But the movie, I think, is just also, in a way, very special too. Transcendent. Whatever the hell that means. It is transcendent. So Cloud Atlas jumps back and forth in a crescendo and decrescendo of narratives. We start with the Pacific Journal of a young man in like the 1800s, I think, and then all of a sudden we dash forward to World War II era, and then we go to modern day, we have like the 70s, and then we jump forward to a futuristic super state that's extremely capitalist, and then the last narrative point is far in the distant future where an apocalypse has absolutely rocked humanity, and we've been reduced back to kind of tribal states and the beginning of our existence almost. And then from there it pivots back in reverse order and you go all the way back down the levels. But through each of these levels there's something that like ties them all. There's this string, like a little parabola that's arcing and mapping and like going through these people's lives. There's something in here that connects them. And it is essentially like an atlas of clouds, in that we all live in the same sky, which if you want to say it's history, it's time, it's the past and present, whatever. We're clouds that drift across the sky. And each of us is affected by each other. It's just extremely beautiful. It's so beautiful. This is a book as well that I cried. The writing is fantastic. Not only that, but you get a whole bunch of stories in this one huge story. I don't want to say too much else about it, other than that this is just like masterful. It's a masterpiece. I love it. I need to read it again and again and again. They're also all told in different formats. Like we have a journal, we have like a science fiction novel, we have an interview, we have just dialogue, which is what we've reverted back to in the extreme apocalyptic future. And it's just so touching. It's just so gorgeous, and so smart and so beautiful. So that is Cloud Atlas. I would highly recommend. I've not had the joy of recommending Cloud Atlas in such a long time. This also changed my life, and I just feel so lucky to have had so many good experiences with books at such a young age that I think they just really saved me, I think, countless times, and just helped me so much even when I'm not really super aware of it. This next book is definitely a favorite book. It's one of the books that I think have affected me the most in a peculiar way, that until I met this book I had okay, now the other ear. Oh man, what is it today? I didn't know a book was really capable of, and I'm talking horror, terror, extreme, paralyzing fear. This book I discovered because it was on a syllabus for a university class in my second year, and I read it, and the professor was like, you know, be careful, like if you need to stop reading this book, that's completely okay. I understand. This book messed me up. This is the kind of book that will make you lay awake at night, terrified, and constantly reach out with your hand just to see if the wall next to you or behind you or the ground under your feet is still there, if it's still real. And I 100% agree. Oh my god, I just had the most experience with this book, and I'm honestly just scared of it every time I hold it up, but that is House of Leaves by Markzed Danielewski. I think this is no, I'm not even gonna say so good. It's just so horrifying. There's just so much going on in this book. This is a very spatial book. It's also split into different narratives. Oh, how do I explain this? We have a man, it doesn't really matter because if you read it, I think you'll understand, but we have a man named Johnny. I don't know if he's in his 20s or 30s, but he comes across boxes of manuscripts? Yes, boxes of manuscripts in this dead man who's died in his apartment. And this dead man has essentially written down manuscripts of a film, essentially created written versions of a film that he saw. And this film was created by a filmmaker who had essentially moved into a house with his wife, his 2 kids, and his dog. And then he started to find out that things in his house were not okay. They were not okay. They were not obeying the laws of the universe. I think it says in the synopsis what his house does. Their house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Maybe that doesn't sound super scary. It's very scary. It's very scary. It's the kind of like fear that makes you stare at your floorboards for so long, convinced that they're not the right size anymore. Like it's that spatial fear. And for me, I think now more than ever, I relate to this book so much. I think this book now actually scares me so much more than it did the first time I read it, because when I first read it, I was, pre-concussion, post-concussion syndrome Emma. I was Emma pre-brain injury. Who I am now, thinking about this book, to me, this encapsulates so much feeling of a concussion, of a serious brain injury, of something like that, something that just completely disturbs, disables, dislocates your sense of self, dislocates your sense of spatial awareness. Maybe it's your depth perception, maybe it's your balance, and all these things were just so affected for me that now when I think about this book, if someone's like, hey, what is a concussion like? This book is, and it's just so scary, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna read it again, honestly, because as you can see, maybe once was honestly enough. I'd love to read more literature, I think, surrounding this book rather than go through the horror of it again, because really essentially what this book is about is just trauma. This book is about trauma, and the ways that it manifests, and the ways that it takes over and disturbs your life. So good though, so good. This next one I don't have too much to say about, other than the fact that I cried from reading it because the writing was so beautiful. I didn't cry because it was, well, I mean, it is sad, but I didn't cry because it was sad. I cried because just like that, that meeting with beauty and language that you didn't know was possible, and it's such an overwhelming representation of the world. But it's also not, because you know that sometimes the language is so much more beautiful than the world it is describing, and in that case that award goes to Oscar Wilde. I would say Oscar Wilde is definitely a favorite writer of mine. Was this the first thing I'd ever read from him? Yeah. This was the first thing I ever read from him. I picked this up because it was a book I'd wanted to read for so long. I read this a couple years ago, I think in 2020, the beginning of 2020, I think is when I finished this. The Picture of Dorian Gray, I'm sure I don't really need to say what it's about. It's extremely famous. I know a lot of you guys have read it and you all love it. This book is honestly responsible for bumping up so much of, I think, the world of literature and what you expect from it, what you know you can get from it, what people are capable of, what you should expect from a book, what you can expect for a book. Oscar Wilde just completely raised the standards of everyone, everywhere. Just gorgeous, just so gorgeous. So yeah, absolutely has to be on this list. I love this book. Okay, this one feels a little out of place, I'm not gonna lie, in the grand picture of all these books together, but I think, sometimes you just have an experience with a book, and if you read the book again, it wouldn't be an all-time favorite, but just because of all the little circumstances that came together when you were reading it, whether that's the ambiance, the atmosphere, where you were in life, and it just created a whole other world for you to step into at the time, and that it just gave you exactly what you needed at the time. And that is After Dark by Murakami. Murakami is, again, one of my favorite authors. I'm thinking objectively I might honestly prefer The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle more than After Dark, but just the experience, like I was saying, that I had with After Dark, and it's a relatively short book, but I ordered this a long time ago, I think off of thrift books, because I was just trying to collect all the Murakami books in the world, clearly. And then this book finally showed up with my grandma, who I was waiting on desperately. This is the time of the first lockdown, when I was in the first quarantine in COVID in 2020, and my grandma was trying to get back from the United States, where she was staying for the winter, and I just remember being so anxious, so worried about her. But then she finally arrived, and also arriving with her was a suitcase of books that I had ordered from thrift books, which I shipped to her place in Florida because shipping is free within the United States. So anyway, she brought these books over the border on the plane, and it also just coincided with her being back, essentially, and her being back home and her being okay. This book as well is a very lonely book full of lonely people. It takes place during one night in Tokyo, and I read this in quarantine when I was feeling extremely lonely. I was staying at my parents' house. I went back home to stay with them for about 3 months or so, and I read this all after dark because that was kind of what I wanted to do with it, to read it in those dark hours. And again, it was a book that just completely changes the way you look at things. All of a sudden, life became so much more magical because in After Dark, Murakami just describes the world after dark and the after dark people who inhabit it, whether that's people who work the night shift or people who can't sleep, people who are just up wandering the streets, people who are going to clubs, or jazz musicians who obviously just prowl the streets in Murakami's Tokyo. And it was just the best thing ever. As well, this book is so... the atmosphere in this book is unlike anything else, because I've said this before, but each chapter begins with a timestamp that you can essentially match up to your reading as well, and almost every chapter comes with a song that is playing in whatever venue the chapter is set in. And so I did that as well, just with the music, and I have this whole playlist, and every time I listen to any one of these songs, most of them are jazz, knowing Murakami, it just instantly transports me back into this magical nighttime life. Transplanted that feeling that you sometimes get in your stomach that is so heavy, so anticipatory. It's like when you're standing outside on a balcony in the dark and you just feel like the whole world is in front of you, but it's a world where almost anything is possible because of course there's magical realism in this book too. This book felt like drinking coffee this book opens in a Denny's at 3 a.m. when you know you're not supposed to, and it's kind of like, it is magic in that you start doing all these daytime things during the night, and it's kind of like this subversion of rules that you're comfortable living your life in, and all of a sudden it feels special because you're doing things you would normally do during the day, during the night, if that makes sense. And it was really cool. So anyway, that is After Dark. I think it has to be on here, honestly, just because of the experience I had with it. It was like a friend. It was like the best company I could ask for at the time when I was just feeling so distraught, so lonely, so isolated, because After Dark is also about people meeting each other during the night, essentially, and connection at a time when that wasn't happening at all, when you weren't allowed to go and do that with people. So I think that's why also it felt so special. This next one I really don't even have any words for. I also read this in quarantine. I almost didn't. It's 100 Years of Solitude, which you may know, oh god, it's my favorite book of all time. No. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. No. The best book I've ever read, I think, is 100 Years of Solitude. Again, I read this in quarantine, which I don't even know, that experience in itself was just extremely interesting. I don't even want to say anything about this book. I think I've talked elsewhere about the plot and stuff, but I don't want to say anything because I had no idea going into this book what it was. I had heard of this book for so long because it's extremely famous and wonderful and the best thing ever written, but then I found it up north when I was at a cottage a few years ago, and it was in like this very small town, it's not even a town, it was like 5 houses and a library, and they were having like a library sale, and this was one of the books in the sale. And I just picked it up and then I left it on my shelf for a couple of years, and then in quarantine I was like, you know what? Haha, 100 Years of Solitude. That sounds like the pandemic quarantine right now. Let's just do it. That's kind of funny. I randomly thought this book was about like a man in prison, like in solitary confinement. No, completely wrong. But I'm not going to tell you what it's actually about because I had no idea, and stepping into this book was like stepping into... I don't even know. Oh god, just everything. This book is just everything. I'm gonna be rereading this this year in the summer. I'd love to do like a read along. I know a lot of you guys have said you want to read this book, and I just cannot wait to reread this. I really don't want to say anything. Like, I just don't want to say anything. You know, those moments when you just love something, you can't say anything. I can't say anything because I love you so much. I'm sorry. All I can tell you guys to do is read it. This one also has a very special place in my heart. I think is this my favorite science fiction? It might be. I mean, it's on this list, so I guess it must be, right? And that is Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. Where did I hear about this book? I think this might have been a recommendation from one of you guys. This was also in the suitcase of books that my grandma brought back for me, so wow. I had wanted to read this book for so long. This is about a man named Chris Kelvin who arrives at the planet Solaris and finds out some very disturbing things. This book is just so disturbing. And so, like, it's extremely heavy sci-fi. I don't think this book is for everyone because you have like Chris Kelvin's narrative, then it's also spliced with these very heavy in-depth scientific science fiction articles that Lem writes about Solaris. It's super realistic in that way, but they're so dense and so hard to wrap your mind around. Like, the conceptualizing that needs to occur in your brain in this book, or that tries to occur in your brain in this book, is such an interesting concept, and I think works so nicely in tandem with what the book is actually about, which is coming to a planet and essentially trying to colonize it. It talks about questions like, what is sentience? How do we measure sentience? How do we know something is aware? How do we even think about that? But on top of that, like I was saying, so disturbing. This is some of like the best dialogue I've ever read, honestly. And on top of that, I didn't read this myself. This was also such a nice experience because it was during some of the very, very bad concussion days I was going through, which was a huge long period and is still affecting me now. But it was at a point that was so bad that I couldn't read for myself. I only had essentially audiobooks. And so my roommate read this book to me out loud, the whole thing. And it was just one of the kindest things someone has ever done for me, but as well, it was just a fantastic experience. We got to talk about it. We got to read it. This took us months to go through because we'd sit down every night and essentially just listen to it. That was fantastic. And as well, this was like a stellar book. This next book was one of my favorite books from 2021, and that is Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi. This is so good. I've talked about this, I think, a lot recently, so I won't say too much about it. Other than that, Ahmed Sadawi takes Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and then places it in the context of 2005, I think. 2005 in US-occupied Baghdad. And we have this man who is trying to collect body parts from civilians, from innocent people who are being blown up essentially by the violence that is going down in Baghdad. And he wants to collect all of their body parts, create them into one person in order for the government, for America, and just for people in general to see these people who are literally being taken apart by violence, by bombing, by the occupation. And he wants people to recognize that they are full people. They are one intact person. They are individuals. They're not these scattered remains. They're not pieces. They are not parts. That his city isn't this mutilated thing, that it is a whole. It's a whole deserving of respect, and he's trying to give that back essentially to a lot of these people. But then of course the experiment wakes up, much like in Frankenstein by Shelley. This was so great. This was so great. I just want to read this book endlessly. So that is Frankenstein in Baghdad. Highly recommend. Okay, here he is again. We have The Dark Interval by Rilke. This might be my favorite one from him, honestly. This whole video has been very personal, I think, but just like on a very like serious level, if you are grieving, who isn't grieving? Who isn't grieving right now? Who isn't grieving any point in your life? I think grieving is just this continuous thing. But if you are experiencing loss, if you have lost someone, if you have lost yourself, if you are thinking you're losing the world, if the world is losing you, if you are sad, if you are unhappy, if you need something and you don't know what it is, if you feel aimless, if you feel just so down, read this book. Read this book. This is The Dark Interval. This is letters on loss, grief, and transformation. Like I said, reading Rilke is like always a very transformative experience, but reading this book, I also recommend reading it with a friend. I read it with one of my friends, Lucy from Crescent Pages. We just, oh god, the bonding that occurred over this book, but also like the experience that this book just changes you from the inside out. Essentially what this book tries to do is help you kind of get rid of your presumptions about death, of your conceptions about what it means to grieve, what it means to lose someone. Can you ever even lose someone? This collection of letters asks, and it's just, I have never gone through something like this. I think this book is just perfect for everyone. At the time that I was reading it, I had never felt like I had lost more of myself than I had when I was reading this. It was at a point where, the concussion thing had gone on for so long that I didn't think I was ever going to get myself back who I was before. And this book was like, hey, you're right, you can't. And that's okay. That's okay. That is okay. Oh man, why am I crying? This book has made me reconsider every, person I've ever lost in my life and what that means. This book doesn't say you have to lose them. This book says let me just read it. I'm not even gonna try. If people took some simple pleasure in reality, which is entirely independent of time, they would never have needed to come up with the idea that they could ever again lose anything with which they had truly bonded. No constellation is as steadfast, no accomplishment as irrevocable as a connection between human beings which, at the very moment it becomes visible, works more forcefully in those invisible depths where our existence is as lasting as gold lodged in stone, more constant than a star. As to the influence of the death of someone near on those he leaves behind, it has long seemed to me that this ought to be no other than a higher responsibility. Does the person who passes away not leave all the things he had begun in hundreds of ways to be continued by those who outlive him, if they had shared any kind of inner bond at all? I want to encourage you in your pain so that you will completely experience it in all its fullness, because as the experience of a new intensity, it is a great life experience and leads everything back again to life, like everything that reaches a certain degree of greatest strength. I imagine how strangled and cut off you currently live, afraid of touching anything that is filled with memories and what is not filled with memories. You will freeze in place if you remain this way. You must not, dear. You have to move, you have to return to his things, you have to touch with your hands his things, which through their manifold relations and affinity are after all also yours. You must continue his life inside of yours, insofar as it was unfinished. His life has now passed onto yours. And that's just only a few. As you can see, this whole thing is just absolutely full. I really, honestly wish I had enough money to buy literally every single person on the planet this book. So that is The Dark Interval. All right, what's next? Okay, is this one supposed to be on the list? I don't know. Let's just say it's on the list. It's The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I think if I was ranking them in a favorites order, The Turn of the Screw would rank bottom. But I mean, something's got to rank bottom. So The Turn of the Screw, this was fantastic. I just love the gothic. I love ghosts. I love everything. But Henry James is just, he's such a jerk. He's such a jerk because I still think about this book. This is about a governess it's like the worst babysitting job in history that you could ever want. It's just the worst babysitting job. It's about a governess who goes to look after two small kids and she starts to see ghosts. Maybe, perhaps. That's it. I just love it. I love this book so much. I think it was so great, so creepy. It's just the right amount of expression of these things, and then he stops and you're like, why are you stopping? What do I even say about this? It's War and Peace. We're almost done this list, but War and Peace is on here by Leo Tolstoy. This is for the Dickens versus Tolstoy book club. This marked like a landmark in my life, in just everything. Like, look at this. Have I ever been more proud of myself? Yeah. Because, like, if you're scared of this book, don't be. It's just reading a page after a page, reading a word after a word after a word. I just read this over a 2-month period where this book just felt like kind of a rebirth. This is Tolstoy's story about the Napoleonic Wars in Russia and his account of a bunch of people living through them. And it's great. It's really dry and tedious at times, honestly, but like if you can push through it, there's so much to discuss. This is my favorite Tolstoy. I think it's brilliant. And on top of that, I don't know, I cried. I got really attached. It is so impressive. It's something that denies categorization. It's just a universal look at war and violence and history. Like, this was just such a big achievement in my life because I read this book all by myself when, you know, for a long time I didn't think I would ever read another book again with my own eyes. And this was fantastic. This was such a sense of accomplishment, achievement, but more than those things, just a sense of joy. I'm so glad I recorded my experience reading this book because I have, I think, 4 videos that are called the Tolstoy Diaries where I read War and Peace, and I'm just so glad that that those memories are there, that I have them there, because I went on a huge journey with this. I'm not going to say anything else about it, I don't think. I mean, it's War and Peace, and yeah, I just can't believe I read it. So that is The Mammoth. That is also on this list as one of my favorite books of all time. These next two kind of go hand in hand, and they are the Iliac, Crest and Untold Night and Day. Again, I'm not going to say too much about these because these were in my top 4 favorite books from last year, so I talked about them very extensively in my best books from 2021 video, but I heard of both of these books simply because the book depository algorithm has come to know me very intimately. And I was buying something, I don't even know what I was buying, but both of these were listed below in like the recommendations, or you might also like. Whoever created the algorithm, thank you, because you were right and you know me better than I know myself, which is a little scary, but these are now 2 of my favorite books of all time. The Iliac Crest is a piece of Mexican literature about gender, about disappearance, about the US-Mexico border, about writing, about women's writing, about the disappearance of women's writing, about women's bodies, and it is fantastic. And Untold Night and Day is a piece of South Korean literature. This is about, oh god, what is this about? What do I want to say this is about? Reality, unreality, dreams, the past, the present, basically like time and your conception of your life and of also other people. It feels like when you're driving, you're at a red light and you look around in like a very heavy traffic area and you see so many different people beside you in cars. Some people have families, some people are alone, and from whatever they're wearing, from whatever look is on their face, you're like, wow, this person has a whole life separate from me. And they just kind of flit past you like little fireflies in the night, and then they're gone and you never see them again. Except sometimes maybe you think you do, or you see other people who are different people from those people at the red light stop, and you think of them in the same way, kind of. I don't know, that's kind of what this felt like. But these were both fantastic. I love these so much. This one I definitely prefer. This is one of my favorite books ever, ever, ever. I want to read it endlessly. This book is a lot. Both of these books are a lot, extremely a lot. They are very deceptive, very confusing, very hard to get at, very intangible, especially Untold Night and Day, which also takes place over one night, one sweltering night in Seoul. Those are those two. Okay, we're getting down to the last 3. Okay, so this one is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, and this is the book that I have most recently discovered that isn't a reread that I've added to my favorite books of all time category. This is my first Angela Carter, and I think she's just definitely going to be a favorite author of all time. Like, oh my god, I don't even know what to call it. It's so provocative, it's so erotic, it's so her writing, but it's also so critiquing and condemning and attacking in its beauty and luxury and lushness. The Bloody Chamber is a collection of fairy tales that are written in the Gothic tradition. The Bloody Chamber was my favorite. It's so decadent. It's so like Baroque in a way. I just love this. I think it's beautiful. Every single one of these is gorgeous. So intentional, so, oh my god, and it's so short, and it's just so good. So I highly recommend The Bloody Chamber. I don't know what other Angela Carter book to read next. And then these next 2 are rereads, and the first time I read them, I did not put them on my favorite books of all time. I didn't give them 5 stars. This first one, it only took the second reread to do it, and that is A Castle in the Clouds by Kirsten Gear. This is probably the most light-hearted book on this thing, but this is a young adult. Oh my god, it just makes me so happy. This book is pure serotonin, and that's completely why it's on here. We follow Sophie, who takes a job as an intern in a remote Swiss hotel. Hotels, if you don't know me, are some of my favorite things. Like, they're just some of my favorite structures. I find hotels so interesting. I love books set in hotels. Any book with a hotel set in it, I will read, so please recommend me some. But there's so much in this book. So much in this book. There's like intrigue, there's romance, there's just fun wholesomeness. This feels like a Studio Ghibli movie, and I just love it endlessly. Like, I couldn't stop smiling, and when like your cheeks hurt when you're reading a book, I just think it honestly deserves a place on this list. Absolutely. Joy. And compared to a lot of these books, I really need some joy, apparently, so it's here. And this next book, this one took how many rereads to land here? We have a relationship. We have a very complicated relationship, Frankenstein and I. I just finished rereading this for like the I think it was my 3rd or 4th time this year, because it was on a syllabus for class, especially because I had to write an essay on it. And a lot of the times when you get so involved with a work, you work with it so closely, you really are digging in the book, digging up things, and suddenly you find things that you didn't see at all, even though I had read this 3 or 4 times. That was fantastic, and especially the process of writing an essay that you just lose yourself in, or if you're just working closely with a text and you're learning so much about it, it just becomes something so much more magnificent and meaningful in a multitude of ways that like take over your life for a little bit. Like for about 2 months, this book took over my life, and I was a walking, talking piece of Frankenstein. This book just has to be on here. It's a 5-star now. I intensely love this. I cannot tell you how much I love it. I think, what is my advice? Because I think this book like made me realize if you give a book 4 stars and you're like, wow, I really like that, why don't I like it more? Like just work with it really closely, annotate it, and then go and explore something in the book that was your favorite part of the book, or that touched you the most, that called to you the most. In this case, it was like the creature for me, but more than that, the material that the creature was created out of, and how Victor essentially just pillages slaughterhouses, and how the creature is a product of animal abuse and animal consumption, but then how Victor also pillages graveyards and charnel houses, and how he's a product of criminals and murderers and the past, and just taking it somewhere else that maybe the book didn't really invite you to take it in the first place. But that's not really the point, because books are there for you to take them wherever you want. You can go wherever you want with them. That's the whole beauty of it. And so I think that's what I would say, because that's really what got it on this list, is that I was like, you know what? You're coming with me. We're going to go down this avenue together. There's a ton going on in this book, but I'm going to focus on this thing for right now. And by focusing on this thing, or turning to the book as a whole, that experience was just mind-blowing. So I don't know if that's what I recommend. So that is the last one on this list, is Frankenstein. Oh my god. I think we finally did it. I don't really know what to say now. What are your favorite books of all time? I have so many on my shelves that, like, looking at them, I know they're gonna be on here. Just so many of these books that I'm like, I cannot wait to read you and see if you make it on this list as well. I also should say I did not include any series on here. These are all standalones, right? Anyway, there you go. I hope this was helpful. I know a lot of you guys have been asking for like my list of all time. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for taking a deep dive into some like very personal favorite books. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're doing okay. And until my next video, I'll see you very, very soon. Ciao.